Welcome back to the Tomb, everyone. This is the Pharaoh, aka Ali. Today's podcast, the pod keys to success. And I am joined by three very important people, and I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Oladipo Lagoon. Good friends with Ali. We had actually participated in Janice and Rachel's podcast previously, and together, and I was also on the Toxic City pod. Maybe coming back from hiatus soon. We'll see. But yeah.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a pharmacy student at Northeastern with Janice, who you'll hear from in a sec. We have our own podcast called Choosing Yourself with Janice and Rachel, and I met Ali through Janice in college.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janice, and I'm also, like Rachel said, in a podcast with Rachel called Choosing Yourself with Janice and Rachel. I met Ali when I was at UMass, and we've been friends ever since.
Okay, so I'd like you guys to kind of tell me about your podcast. Like, what is the format of it? What kind of topics do you guys discuss?
So I guess I'll start. So the Toxic City pod was created by myself, my friend Reed, and our friend Joe. And basically, the format of it is kind of like a barbershop top, like not nothing too crazy, but we definitely get toxic. We make our jokes. We kind of bring it back to like just carefree joking and no holds bar between us. We'll roast each other. We also kind of implement some other things like music into it. We'll throw on some background music. We'll throw on some clips going on in the background. Lots and lots of sound bites for conversation starters or movers, and just try to have fun and enjoy ourselves on the pod overall.
All right, and then Janice and I's podcast, Choosing Yourself with Janice and Rachel, we kind of just talk about a lot of different topics, from self-love, relationships, just post-grad life, just any obstacles that one might come across in any of those topic areas. And we just have a lot of fun. We have, I don't know, like short, like 30-minute episodes, and we have some like longer ones. And then, yeah, we'll get a lot more into like how we started that, I'm sure, throughout this podcast episode.
Well, yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Was like, how did you guys get into podcasts, and like what sparked you to start your own podcast?
Well, for our podcast with Rachel, we kind of just like came up with the idea as like a joke at first, and then the more we talked about it, we honestly have so many conversations with each other almost every day, or like as much as we can with our busy schedules with school and stuff like that. And we realized that, oh my God, like these conversations can actually be relatable to a lot of people. And we just think that we go through a lot of different obstacles and relationships and stuff like that a lot of people honestly go through as well. Like I'm sure a lot of post-college, post-grad students, or still currently in grad school students, go through a lot of stress and anxiety and toxic relationships and stuff like that. And talking about it, being able to hear that other people relate to it too, or go through the same thing, can be really beneficial. So we thought that maybe we can start a podcast just having these unscripted conversations with each other. We honestly decide on the topics like right before we record, and we don't have a script or barely any notes, and we just try to have very fluent conversations with real conversations that we decide that we want to talk about, and then we get really good feedback out of it. So we just thought we should just continue doing that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the topics that you guys covered was definitely relatable, especially the one, I think it was the imposter syndrome one, like especially when you're in grad school going through and you're looking around, it's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. It's like, am I really that smart?
And what's interesting is that I think we didn't have a specific demographic that we were trying to aim for or a specific gender group, but what we noticed was that a lot of males that more than expected listened to our podcast, which was definitely not what we expected at all, because we thought that what we go through would be more aimed to females just because we're both girls. So it was kind of surprising that a lot of guys would give us feedback saying that, oh my God, like this is relatable. Like I go through this too, especially the imposter syndrome one.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. I wouldn't have expected that either. I think I remember you talking about that on one of the other episodes that we had. And I just remember, I think then I was thinking like, oh, maybe just because I guess I hear that guys use podcasts more, maybe, girls keep their podcasts in secret, like true crime stuff and whatnot. But I think it's interesting hearing like who the demographics are. Like there was a podcast that I was listening to recently, and it was a bunch of guys kind of doing a similar thing to like a call her daddy kind of situation, and a lot of their listeners were women who were trying to figure out like what do guys like in the bedroom and like what's going on, like just trying to really understand. So it's funny to see how like your audience like grows.
Yeah, because I think especially with the podcast that you just talked about, it's like with that, some people, instead of having conversations with their friends from the opposite sex, they might just turn to a podcast and like, oh, I can learn from this instead of having that conversation with so and so from my friend group.
Mm-hmm.
But so how did you get into podcasting, Deepa?
So a while ago, Joe, well, if you go to my friends and ask them, Joe will tell you that one day he told us we should do a podcast, and then Reed and I just like brushed it off, I guess. And then I really don't remember that conversation happening. Not that it didn't happen, but I personally just don't remember happening. But Reed and I ended up just getting like the equipment and saying let's just start doing it. And Joe, we got Joe back on board after we cleared that up. But really just we both have been pretty much like really into podcasts, really into like the Joe Budden podcast, the Brilliant Idiots with Charlamagne the God and Andrew Schultz, and just kind of like podcasts that kind of connected to us from like a hip hop lens, but also through like, just pop culture, just, current events and things that are going on, as well as like just having fun with your friends, I think that kind of just became like the inspiration for us. Like we already sit around and joke about all like things all the time. Like why not just put a mic in front of us and record it? And like Reed at one point he was writing jokes for Michael Blackson when we were in high school, like on like a side thing. And so like it kind of was always a thing in the back of our mind, like we could do this. So we just figured why not.
Okay. So I guess the kind of what Janice was talking about is like how for your podcast, you kind of think of the topics kind of right before you start recording. So I guess my question would be is like, are there any topics for both everyone here? Are there any topics that are, I guess, kind of off the table talk that you guys would not talk about?
I guess I'll start. I would say I personally don't think for me that there's anything that I wouldn't want to talk about. And if it comes to the point where I don't want to talk about it, I'll like make it known. But I think it's tough when it gets to like personal things. Like especially when you're joking, you don't want to push the line too much. So I'd say definitely personal things. When it gets to like really personal things, you got to be really careful about where you go. And it's probably easier in like Rachel and Janice's podcast, where the whole aim of the podcast is to kind of be like transparent and vulnerable and kind of delve into relationships, as opposed to like ours, where we're just like, what's the funniest thing about this situation and how can we keep that going for like the next 30 minutes or however long, get like callbacks and things of that nature. So
Gotcha.
I would say for us, like Janice and I both have to be super like conscious of, since we were in school, like we always were thinking in the back of our mind, like, would we want like a future employer to hear something that we're saying and what would they think about that? So I would say kind of exactly what Depot was just saying, like some like really personal things, like maybe of like sexual topics or anything like that. Like some podcasts like Call Her Daddy definitely they go like really into that type of stuff, but we were a little more conscious of that and tried to like not maybe go as far because just for the whole like employment reason.
Yeah, and on
Gotcha.
top of like the sexual things, maybe not going in depth about our, drunk, crazy stories. Like we were all in high school. We were all in college. We were all at UMass. Like I'm sure we know that we have a lot of crazy experiences, drunken experiences, and it's just being conscientious of not going very in depth with that. Just because, of course, like Rachel said, the employment thing, you never know who's listening to this. And it's not like we all keep a secret of our podcast. Like we broadcast it on social media and stuff like that. Like we're all on Spotify or something like that. And you never know, someone who you don't want to hear it would hear it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I noticed that you guys also do is that if you are telling like a personal story, you do either change the name or just omit the name because, like you said, you don't know who's listening. So that's definitely something that I'm going to implement in my podcast as well, because there are some topics that are going to get a little bit hard for some people to hear the lens of which like I looked at their behavior.
Right.
So
and it's also like on their behalf too. Like there are people that we talk about in our podcast, of course, especially like our first episode. Like we definitely changed the name. But it's not only like for our sake, but it's like for their sake. Like I'm sure they don't want other people to hear what we talk about a certain person. You know what I mean? So it's just not covering our butt, but like, covering someone else's feelings as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Especially because like if they said something to you in confidence or they did something that they're not expecting the entire world to hear about, a couple days later or however long later from when the experience happened. So
yeah, I think it's definitely, if something was said in confidence, then like, yeah, you should definitely be quiet about it. But I can say that when I was on Janice and Rachel's podcast, that when it was announced that I was going to be on it, someone actually did reach out to me and asked me, was like, oh, did you mention me in it? And that kind of clicked and it was like, oh, like, first of all, I wouldn't do that, but that kind of made me conscientious of the fact that whatever I do say, it's out there. So if I speak ill of this person or just tell the facts of what happened, that could change how people view them. And without that person being there on the podcast to kind of go back and forth, then it's a one-sided story. Mm-hmm. But I definitely should have told that story.
Change the name.
Just change the name. No, but so I guess if someone came up with the idea to start a podcast, it's like, how would they go about doing it? Because I know that when Depot told me all the stuff I needed to do, I thought you were speaking a different language for a while.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of what are the steps to starting your own podcast?
I think step one is learn what an RSS feed is. For sure.
100%.
Yeah. Because it sounds really complicated, but when you really get down to it, it's basically just like a source link for your podcast. Like a link so that programs and websites and different platforms can like keep that subscription basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was probably one of the most complicated like pieces of information that Janice and I had to figure out when we first started our podcast too. And we were not sure. So we had to Google tutorials about it. And there were all these different choices of an RSS feed. But actually, Depot, you ended up telling us about our favorite website that we used, which is Anchor.
Oh yeah. Shout out to Anchor. They're really good because they will either, if you're starting from scratch, they'll take your RSS feed and put it to all the different platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the like. They'll even send it to like a bunch of like third party like podcasting platforms. And on top of that, you can edit everything for your podcast through the app. So it's really, really nice to use.
When Rachel and I first started this, when we made our first episode, I think we spent 10 hours that day on Zoom, literally trying to figure out what the hell we were doing, because we did not expect to post that first episode on that day. Like, we recorded on that day, then spent like 8 hours later figuring out not only how to edit, but what the hell an RSS was. I still barely understand what it is. And we like even like paid for things and stuff like that to like edit and stuff. And I think that like my biggest advice is like figure out what exactly you're doing and like how to edit and stuff like that before you just like go straight forward. I don't know. I mean, like we just spent like 10 hours, I remember that day, and we did not expect to spend 10 hours. So it's going to take a lot longer than you think in the beginning. But then once you get used to knowing how to like edit and how to upload and stuff, it gets a lot easier and faster.
Okay. And you said that the platform that you used was Anchor, and that throws it up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everything like that. So because I ran into this when I was setting it up, is like kind of walking people through the process of setting your podcast up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because both of them have very different types of criteria for them. So could anybody kind of speak about that, the difference between them?
I think Apple Podcasts is, from what I remember, I think Apple Podcasts was much easier to get onto. You pretty much just send them your RSS feed link once it's created, or you can also make an Apple Podcast like login, and once you do that, they'll set up your podcast on their platform. It takes like a few days for like verification and stuff. Same with Google Podcasts, was pretty similar, but once it's up, it's up there, and it's really nice to see like the finished product. Spotify, I remember being a little bit harder, a little bit more technical, but I don't really remember a lot from the setup portion in terms of like the websites. Once I got into using Anchor, it just streamlined everything really.
I want to mention that I think one thing I remember is when we were setting up on Apple and Spotify, we needed a cover photo that was of a very specific dimension and resolution. So that's something to think about when you're kind of designing your podcast cover or something like that. Take a look at what the requirements are for putting it up on each of those websites so that you can kind of create your design like with those things in mind.
Yes, because that's exactly what I ran into. I had someone send me, shout out to Mo, send me a cover art, and I had to reach back out to him saying, it's like, yo, this is way too small. It's like, I need a higher resolution. And I mean, it worked out, but yeah, like those are the like very minute details that can kind of throw a wrench in the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. On the topic of like cover art and photos, I know, so on my podcast, Reed would do a lot of the graphic designing, like the cover art, through the Fonto app, which you can use to. It's kind of like a mini Photoshop that you can just put on like your iPhone, which is really nice to use because we could literally make the cover art like right after the episode. Once we knew like what the running joke was or what the like running topics were for that day, we could put the episode up, make the cover, and just set it for like the next day to be posted.
Okay, that's what's up. So this is definitely going to be a question for anyone that starts their own podcast. How the hell do I get paid through it? How do I get paid for podcasting?
So I have a couple of things to touch on for this. So with Anchor, right, they tell you that you can make money through your podcasts. And so Janice and I were eagerly awaiting like sponsorships through that website and everything until we found out that you actually need like thousands of views and you get paid per 1,000 views, and you really only get people wanting to advertise on your podcast if you have that many views. So I was thinking about this when I was thinking of what I wanted to suggest. And Janice and I have a friend who has their own podcast. It's called Matcha Mondays. And it's a great podcast. And actually what I noticed that they do to make money, because they also just started out, they actually reach out to like local businesses. Obviously it's matcha related, so they reach out to local like matcha businesses, but you could probably do this with any type of like local business who's looking for exposure, and you could like talk to them about some sort of collaboration using your podcast. So I think that that's probably the way to start out, as far as making money goes, and you also get a lot of exposure and you help the community too at the same time. So I think that's probably the best way to get started out money wise, but we were kind of thinking that it would happen through Anchor, but it didn't, because we didn't get that much exposure, like thousands of views right away.
Gotcha. Depot, do you have anything to
No, that's exactly
touch on?
what I was gonna say. Like Anchor, the one tough thing about it is like the spot, like Rachel said, you need to like really have like a core fan base that's like really driving up your listens. Otherwise, you can't really monetize. And I was gonna say Reed, Joe, and I didn't do it, but we were looking into like how do we, link up with different companies, or look for small businesses that are looking for exposure, and just different ways to monetize like that.
And I also think like in terms
Gotcha.
of making money through a podcast, it's not gonna happen like very quickly. Like you kind of have to go into it not expecting to get any profit out of it for a long time, because like, I mean, it's super hard to make money through a podcast that I've realized. And like you kind of have to like first like build your podcast to the way that you want it to be, and like build your social media platform as much as you can before even small businesses what you want to consider having you like collaborate with each other. Because like if your social media platform and your podcast are not having that many views to begin with, like not many local businesses are even going to consider wanting to even team up with you. So I think that just like at least taking as much time as you can, like slowly building yourself up and having good content and good enough followers, like building yourself up, making yourself more known, and then you can start considering maybe trying to collaborate or like get in touch with local businesses to make some money out of it.
Really good point there.
That's interesting that you touch upon the social media part. So do you think that which one would you say is the hardest part, the podcasting or the social media marketing part of it, like trying to stay up relevant, always posting things?
If I had to choose, I would say the podcast first, because if you have yourself a good podcast, like you build it to the best that you can, social media advertising won't be as hard as it may seem. Like it is going to take time, like anything is going to take time. Like you can't build thousands of followers in one day. Like, but if you have good content in your podcast enough that people would even want to listen to, like I know, like for example, Call Her Daddy, like I know like Alexandra Cooper like started this in her like dorm room, and it took like at least over a year before she even started to get known for her podcast. But it's because like her episodes were content that people were fascinated by. So like if you have episodes and you talk about things that other people are fascinated by and are drawn to, then building your social media platform won't be as difficult.
Okay. So I know that, well, you guys mentioned Call Her Daddy and everything like that. It's like, and I know that Depot talked about the Joe Budden podcast. It's like, are there any other podcasts that you kind of drew like inspiration from for how you wanted to approach your own podcast?
Um, not that, not one that I've used yet, but just kind of a podcast that I've been listening to and drawing inspiration from recently was It's the Real. They're not, they're like very niche, but they're basically a hip hop podcast which is based on two brothers who live in like they live in New York. They're not twins, but one of them is a twin, and they kind of operate like they're twins. Like they're just super interested and fascinated by like hip hop culture, and one of them uh, at one point was like Kanye's videographer, and like they're very well interconnected, and they're very much like themselves. That you can just tell from every episode, and just the way they draw inspiration from the people they interview is very captivating, I would say. And I think that's a really important part of podcasting, making sure that like whatever you're doing is just really motivating you and drawing you back. Because if it draws you back, then it'll draw, your listeners back.
Mm.
So for me, I wasn't really a big podcast listener, but I did listen to some episodes of Manifestation Babe. And basically, like, the whole thing is it makes you really motivated to like improve your life. It's kind of like a self-improvement type of podcast. So for me, I was just kind of thinking I want to like uplift our listeners and just like Depot said, just like motivate them a lot. And that's kind of what I was thinking when we were doing our podcast.
Okay. Well, I can definitely say that all of you guys have motivated me to do this podcast. Yeah, a lot of people have said to me in the past is like, oh, you should probably start your own podcast. And I kind of just, shrugged it off. But now since I have had some free time, I was able to start it, and hopefully I'm doing the same thing that you guys are doing, motivating people to learn and to kind of just self-reflect about some of the topics that we've talked about. And that kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask is like, have you guys learned anything about yourselves through podcasting?
I guess I have kind of learned something. So I have always been like a very quiet person, reserved. I don't really like share a lot with people. So this was kind of a big step in, I mean, because when you put out a podcast, you don't know who's hearing it, you don't know who's listening to it. So like being that vulnerable in a like a what do you call it, like a format where so many people could hear you, that was, I kind of learned that I'm better at using my voice than I previously thought, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Something that I learned was just kind of like in let me backtrack. What you'll notice this if you listen to your podcast episodes a lot, like just the different things that you do when you speak that you didn't really notice until after you listen to them, like different, not ticks, but like just different things and mannerisms that you have.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, and this might be kind of why Rachel thought she like wasn't as solid in her like vocal performances. She originally thought like people like listening to themselves naturally, you don't like the sound of your own voice. Like you have that like cognitive dissonance between like how your voice sounds to you and how it sounds when it's to other people. And I think that kind of plays into, people feeling comfortable with podcasting in general.
So have you guys grown out of that?
No.
Okay.
No, because like whenever Rachel and I like edit our we re-listen and like edit and stuff like that, oh my goodness, the amount of likes and that we edit out of our episodes, it drives me insane just like listening to my voice, because I remember like there'd be times where I'm saying one sentence and there'd be like 12 likes in it, or like 10 ums or something like that, and it drives me insane. It's like a little pet peeve, not a little, it's like a big pet peeve of mine, and it still drives me insane. So I 100% agree with Deepa. And also adding on to answering your question, I think that I've learned that I'm more relatable than I expected that I would be. like more people have reached out saying that, oh my God, like I feel the same way, like I feel this too, like oh my God, I didn't know you felt that way too. I think that like made me feel a little bit better that I wasn't like the only person who like had these thoughts or went through these different things. So
So I guess what would be like the best feedback that you guys have received from podcasting from listeners or, well, listeners? Like a feedback that's definitely like just stuck out to you is like, oh wow, like that kind of, I don't want to lead you in question, but made you feel like, okay, this is something good. This is something useful that is actually impacting people.
I guess I touched upon this earlier, but the fact that more guys give us feedbacks than girls do, because obviously we never expected guys to even bother listening to our two girls podcast, like talking about vulnerability and like stuff like that, and having guys literally telling us like, oh my God, I'm listening to this in the gym. Like I was like so ingrained into this episode, I forgot I was even in the gym or something like that, you know? And it's just, you never expect guys, like men, like boys to listen to our podcast while they're working out and feeling like, oh my God, this is so relatable, and like listen to the whole entire 45, like 1 hour episode of us just talking about our lives. So
I would say it's a little bit different because our podcast isn't like, it's not like motivational. But I'd say like just giving people a laugh and having people reach out and just being like, oh my God, like that was hilarious, I can't believe you guys said that, or just different things, and especially hearing from people that you haven't spoken to in a long time, just hearing them react to it and like feeling a connectedness, feeling like a common thing you'll hear from people when they talk about podcasts is like, oh, I felt like I was right there with you guys, I felt like I was joking around with you, I'm like yelling at my phone or whatever, and it's really nice to hear that like you give people kind of like that feeling of being like with a group or being social or just having a laugh with each other. So
Without a doubt. And I think especially from this past year, that with the physical isolation of it, is that having podcasts like that definitely has helped some people's mental health, because there are some people that just live by themselves, and podcasting and listening to that type of stuff is like, can be therapeutic in some sense.
very true. And just people who like are working all the time, and depending on the job, obviously it's easier to listen to podcasts than other jobs, but like just having something that they can just go into work and know like I can put this on for a couple of hours, it'll make my work fly by, and it'll just give me just a good sense of self.
And that's exactly what I did with both of your podcasts. While I was working at Tuskegee, I'd be in an office, small little office by myself, and was like, you know what? I don't feel like talking to anyone today, and just put that in. And before I knew it, the workday was over. So it's definitely a good way to pass the time.
Definitely appreciate the feedback.
Oh no problem, Mr. Toxic. But so because of the fact that you guys work with your friends, I guess, what is one of the like hardest things about working with your friends in a podcast setting? Because I know people have different views, different topics, different things they want to talk about, and sometimes I'm not saying this happened, but I know that sometimes personalities clash. So like, what is one thing that, well, not one thing, but can kind of talk about how working with your friends has influenced your podcast?
I would say just making sure that like you're on the same page with certain things, especially from the start. Like we had different views on like marketing and like which platforms to use. Like should we focus more on Instagram than Twitter, or vice versa, and just things like that. So, and it's interesting that some of the platforms where I've learned from just like researching have the most engagement. Like you would never like, or at least maybe our generation and our demographic would never even like look to. Like Facebook marketing is apparently one of like the best marketing tools you could use. But like to go and market on Facebook just feels so awkward and foreign. So like I don't know, just things like that. So
yeah, because we kind of left Facebook behind for as soon as our parents started getting on it, we were just like, you know what, y'all can have this. We're going somewhere else.
mm-hmm.
And that's probably going to happen the same thing with Instagram if they ever get on there, like fully get
True.
on there.
But who knows? They might be like, that might be the demographic that would listen to it the most. And you never know until you actually go through and like start advertising over there or start, posting over there.
Yeah, that's so true. And even TikTok nowadays is something that has to be utilized because it's growing so quickly. So, and you never know, like you can go super viral on TikTok and then you'll have like millions of people listening to your podcast overnight. So, using all of those different like social media platforms. And then to answer your question, Janice and I, we were always kind of like sharing ideas and brainstorming and stuff. One of the things for us was just our schedules and figuring out like when we can record, because obviously it takes a lot of time, and our 10-hour day, when we were figuring stuff out, like we're both like busy with school and work and stuff. So we both had to like coordinate our schedules a lot. But as far as like content and stuff, like it's just about kind of like trusting each other. When you work with someone else, like trust each other, they have really good ideas, and just share your knowledge, and it usually ends up coming out really good.
And I think it's also very important that like if you're doing this with someone, that you're very comfortable with them and you're very close to them, because if you're not comfortable doing something like this, like a podcast with whoever you're doing this with, it's just not going to work out, because you just have to be, I don't know, you just have to be comfortable talking about different things, whether it's like something vulnerable, like personal, or something funny, like Deepo's podcast. Like it just becomes more fluent and easily listenable if it feels comfortable. Because I mean, if you're listening to podcasts, sometimes you can tell that there is like uncomfortable like tension, or just like it sounds awkward or weird, and that's just not what you want your listeners to see or feel when they're listening to your content.
Mm-hmm. And like Deepo said, like there are a lot of financial decisions you might have to be making, and like spending money on marketing, like you were saying, like there could be a disconnect there, or spending money on your RSS feed, or money on different things that might come up. So yeah, just making sure you're comfortable financially and being open with the person, like comfortable to have those financial conversations with someone, and how much you're willing to like invest in the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that I think, Rachel, you said that when you guys first started out, you ended up paying for a tutorial, or?
Yeah, so we were paying for our RSS feed actually before Devo told us about Anchor. We were paying for a kind of graphic design type of website that allowed you to make videos out of podcast clips.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget what else. Oh, we were obviously paying for like Facebook marketing, Instagram marketing, and that type of thing.
Okay, so depending on which route people go, that they have to be ready to have some type of financial investment in it. You're not just gonna start it off for free, depending on which route you want to take.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and you can start it off for free and kind of move that way, but at some point, to grow your audience, you have to spend money. There's no way. You're like, organic growth is great, but there's almost like no such thing with like all of the podcasts that are coming out now. You have to expose yourself in a way that like really draws people. And marketing 101, you gotta, at some point you gotta put some money up to have your podcast shared to people who've never seen it before. And the world is big, so
I can't just pass them out like mixtapes.
Unfortunately, no. I always wondered if there was like what like the 2021 version of that looks like, because like you really like no one has a CD player anymore. Like maybe you could pass out like a snap code or like something, or
like a QR code.
QR code, yeah. Like, but yeah, you really just gotta put yourself out there one way or another.
Maybe you could do that. Maybe you could just start just hanging on the corner with the QR code, just boop, subscribe.
Could be something.
I mean,
this could be something that you may want to edit out, but maybe not. But I something that I did to advertise our podcast was I had a Tinder and a Hinge profile, and I just put our podcast on it and underneath my bio or something like that. And like I didn't really, I mean, I don't take those apps seriously personally, but like I put our Instagram podcast there, and it says something like, oh my god, I should check out my podcast. And surprisingly, a lot of people like would follow or like DM saying like, I just follow, I just listen and good blah 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 and stuff like that. So like, I mean, it's just like another like dumb way, or like kind of, I don't know, kind of dumb.
No, that's smart.
To, like advertise your podcast to other people, and like I would make myself like interested in men and women so that like everyone, like every gender, like both genders can see that and like know that like I have that underneath, and like who knows, maybe like they'll actually really listen to it and like follow it.
So I have to ask, have people tried to get dates with you for like from using the I listened to your podcast?
Of course. I mean, I don't respond like definitely, but like I'll just be like, oh, listen to the podcast and then follow, and then like it's super terrible of me to do that, but like I'll be like, oh, maybe I'll give you my phone number, maybe give it a follow, and they do follow, and then like I like ghost them for the rest of the time, but they still end up following. And so like, you know what, anything for the views, anything for the follow.
Hey, good dope sells.
Do it for the cast. Gotta do it for the cast. That's
awesome.
That's awesome.
I mean, obviously I don't take it like seriously. It's not like I'm gonna go meet up or actually like give anyone my number. It's just like another way to expose your content.
To get it, yeah.
True.
So everyone go out there, make a Tinder, make a Bumble, make a Hinge.
Honestly, all three of those I made just for that purpose. If you see my Hinge, you'll see our podcast like the first thing underneath.
Okay, that is definitely gonna implement that trick. Well, strategy. Sorry, not a trick. Strategy.
It honestly worked better than I expected. Like I would message Rachel and be like look at this. Like,
we just got 30 subscriptions.
we just got like 5 extra follows.
Got six super likes. Let's go. Let's keep going. So I guess we kind of talked about like the positive feedback that you guys have gotten. Have you guys received any like negative feedback, or do you kind of just not listen to the haters?
We didn't really receive a lot of like negative feedback per se. I feel like for our yeah, I think for our podcast, like it was pretty overt, like either gonna like it or you're not. And so if people don't like it, I don't think they felt the need to voice their opinions to us. Maybe they were voicing it to like their friends, like, oh, I can't believe like these guys would talk about things like this, but like in there, as far as I know, it hasn't gotten back to us. So
we got some bad feedback once. Janice, do you want to tell them about it?
It was actually from a really good friend of mine. I feel like I talked about this.
I think you may have told.
I've definitely made this known, like vented this out. But like, someone who I thought was like a really good friend of mine was just like FaceTime me out of the blue after like, you know, like a while of not talking to each other for a while, just because of like schedule wise and just like, I mean, like I don't talk to anyone when I'm like working, but just like out of nowhere, they were like, why are you guys doing this? Like, are you guys doing this like as a joke, or like, why are you guys talking about this? This is kind of dumb. Like, don't you feel embarrassed? You know, stuff like that. And I just like, I was like really offended by it. And they just kept laughing it off, saying, this is kind of embarrassing for you guys. Like, why you want to talk about this? Are you trying to get famous out of this? Like, you're trying to make money, trying to get rich or something like that? And I just straight up hung up and was like, this is stupid. Like, this is ridiculous, you know? But that was like the only negative feedback per se that we know of. I don't know. There may be people who listen to this and be like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is dumb. Like, and don't take us seriously. And I'm sure like a lot of people would experience that, like knowing that there are people outside who would think that this is a joke. Like they don't take you seriously. And I'm sure like Deepo maybe like you may experience like some people may not take your podcast seriously. I mean, like everyone doesn't take certain podcasts seriously. And especially like people that know you and maybe even your friends like don't really care about it or don't think too much about it. But honestly, we didn't let that get to us at all because we weren't really doing that for them. We were doing this more so for us and for people who want to listen to us. And I think we can all agree that we're at the age where we don't really care what people think and try not to let other people affect you because like at this point it just doesn't even matter. Like we have more important things to think about and care about than what outsiders think about what we're doing for ourselves.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I think I do remember you telling me that story just kind of off the air. And when I kind of thought about it, is that people will try to discourage you from doing things that they themselves can't do. So it's like that person has a problem with being vulnerable. It's like, so seeing someone close to them do that, it's like, oh, well, they must be doing it for nefarious reasons. Like, no, it's like some people want to, well, not want, well, some people are comfortable with being vulnerable and understand the utility of how it can help other people. Because I say all the times that people only try to, when people try to tear you down, that means you are above them to begin with.
Beautiful quote.
Thank you.
I think I just I think I would just add like it in those situations, it kind of just like Ali said, like people will feel uncomfortable for you when it's like, first of all, you know, get right with yourself. You know what I mean? Like get comfortable with yourself and figure out like why you're so offended by like the idea of me being like a career. Like at the end of the day, doing podcasting and things of this nature, like it's a creative outlet, and like creative outlets are naturally a vulnerable space. So if you can't even get with the idea of like being vulnerable in a creative outlet, like do you really even understand what like a podcast is to begin with? So
definitely, because it's like it's essentially you're making art, and art is supposed to entice some type of reaction from people, and the type of reaction you get from any type of content that any of us put out is not a reflection of us, but it's a reflection of them onto us. So it's like, so don't project your own insecurities and vulnerabilities onto me because you haven't dealt with it. So you try to discourage someone else from living in their truth. So I guess the next thing that I would ask you guys is that what would be your overall advice to new podcasters, people that are just getting into it, not really sure where to go with the topic, the format, where they're gonna be posting things, like, so drop some gems.
I would say number one is to have a microphone because it might sound fine on your computer, but it'll just sound so much more high quality and clear if you have a microphone, and you can get one super cheap off Amazon or something like that. But there definitely are super affordable ones. I think Janice and I got one for like $30 on Amazon or something, and it's lasted pretty long. Like it's pretty good. And then along with that, there are so many tutorials on Google. That's pretty much how we learned how to do everything from like editing on GarageBand to posting to learning how to do Anchor. And then, yeah, just have fun and be yourself.
I would definitely agree with the getting a microphone, because
I feel personally attacked.
long. I mean, you sound pretty solid right now, but like long term, like a microphone really changes things. And like I remember Reed and I, we used like Fat Kid Deals. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it's like a Twitter account that just sends you like random deals for different things. And they sent us they posted something about a podcasting like setup. So we were able to get a super cheap podcasting setup. We definitely upgraded because the mics weren't as good quality as we wanted to them to be. But once you kind of get invested into the craft, I think you'll really respect that quality, and it'll really drive different decisions that you make along the way. And I would also like to add, I think setting boundaries, but also just like having fun, set your boundaries, plan everything, try not to get, don't work yourself to the bone for it, but like, make sure you plan everything, get your solid blueprint out, research your RSS feeds, and then, the most important thing is have fun with it. And because like I said before, like this is a creative outlet. At the end of the day, you want to be comfortable doing whatever it is that you're doing with podcasting or however you're creating your art. So
I 100% agree with Depot. And also, I guess to figure out what kind of theme you want your podcast to be, like what do you want to draw out of your podcast, like what message you mainly want to put out, and that would go in hand with like what your social media is going to be like, what kind of graphics you're going to use, and just figuring that out can make your plan or figuring out your episodes a little bit easier, because then like this is the kind of foundation or content I want to bring out, like the theme to bring out. And also not necessarily make it a priority, but also like if you want this to kind of succeed in a way that you want it to, at least put in some effort, like more effort than you think, especially when you're starting it out, because it does take a decent amount of time starting out, and each episode does take a decent amount to make and get with, because editing is going to take, you're going to have to re-listen to the episode, and that's going to take like an hour, and then editing it wise, you're going to keep pausing and then edit and pausing, so it's going to take like 3 hours. So it is going to take some time, and like not to expect that it's super easy to do and it's super quick.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point too on the editing. One tip that we found worked for our podcast was like editing live. Like we would use GarageBand, and it's probably a little bit different because we were mostly editing if we said something that was like either totally out of pocket or like we said someone's name in real life. So we would edit on the fly and pause GarageBand, make sure like let's go back, re-listen to it, maybe laugh, and then cut it out. And for a while we were thinking about chopping it up and putting it out as like bloopers or like Patreon or something. But yeah, just making sure that you take into account all the time that it's going to actually take. For sure.
So you use GarageBand when you're recording your episodes?
Yep.
Okay.
And we have a mixer that we use. So we have 3 mics plugged into a mixer that was then plugged into my MacBook, which we were using GarageBand on.
Okay. So do you think that there are certain advantages to using like GarageBand or other platforms for recording? Because we're doing this right now through Zoom.
I think Zoom is really good because like there's not really like limits. We're all in separate locations right now. We're recording. It sounds pretty solid, like overall, especially with I think the kind of podcast you're doing. You're talking to a lot of people from different locations, different backgrounds. Like Zoom is really, really awesome because we're literally talking from almost 4 different states, like, or we could be talking from 4 different states if we really want to, like, just different things like that. Just being able to have more versatility. If you're in the same room, you definitely want to make sure you have a mic, probably have a mixer as well, and just kind of, some sort of sound equipment, an open space, open room, different things like that.
Rachel and I first tried to use GarageBand to edit our podcast, and I don't know, maybe we were just incompetent or just idiots, but we, for the life of us, could not figure out how to use it. And then our computers are overheating, and then we were just like, this is like, we're at loss. So like I forgot what was like the website we ended up using.
So there's this website made through Spotify called Soundtrap, and they had a free trial. I don't know if the free trial's like a universal thing that they have. It's a really good website for editing, but it does cost monthly after you finish the free trial. But with GarageBand, it was going fine at first, like for short episodes, like 30-minute episodes. But one time we tried to edit like an hour and 45-minute episode through it. We got through so much of the editing, spent so much time on it, and then somehow the whole thing was messed up. And after that, I was like never going to use GarageBand again after that. It was so bad.
I think that was like part of our 10-hour day for our first episode,
Yeah,
or like
probably.
something like that. And we were just like, at that point, we were like so impatient with it. We were just like, I don't know, I felt like my computer was gonna explode. So like, and we didn't even try to record on GarageBand because we had no idea that was even a thing. So we were just like, Zoom it is. And it's also like we found that we tested it out at first, like just talking for like 5 minutes to each other and see how that went. And actually it went like super well. So we just continued to do that. And with our schedule wise, it just made the most sense. It's not like we're very close. We live very close to each other too. We live like at least half an hour away. So like we just figured like that was the most convenient, easiest thing for us to do, especially like I would come home straight from work and then do this at night. And then I don't know, it was just scheduling wise, it was the most convenient.
So because I thought about it with doing Zoom, it also is like the video side of it as well. It's like, did you guys end up putting any of your episodes on like YouTube with the video recordings, or has it strictly only been audio?
For us, we were strictly audio. We were talking kind of about doing Zoom or not doing Zoom. Sorry, doing some sort of recording because we all have like the newest iPhones and whatnot. So if we really wanted to, we could set it up. But I think part of it was just because like we were recording like in my room, so it didn't really feel like it's not like you have like a studio. You know what I mean? Like if we had like a studio and it was, not like my life in the videos every day, it probably been more of a thing. But I definitely think that having a video element to your podcast is great because a lot of people don't want to just listen to something. Like, well, maybe not a lot of people, but there's always going to be a listener who wants to also see, all the podcasts that I listen to, they have some sort of video element because it just makes sense, especially if you have like guest-based things with like more prominent guests, like people want to see that person. So
the one time we ever used a video from Zoom, I think it's like when we try to make a TikTok. So I don't even know how that went exactly. Like it took a lot longer than we thought, but we did end up posting a TikTok with our Zoom video. Very awkward, kind of uncomfortable, but we did post it. And that was the last time we did that.
Yep, the last time. But I also heard that like marketing using videos is the best way to market. The most people see it, most people engage with videos. So if you are using Facebook marketing or Instagram marketing, having video elements can be really, really helpful and important.
Mm. So get them videos out. Gotcha.
Yep.
And them
subtitles.
TikToks.
And subtitles, because a lot of people are watching videos at like work or something and they don't have headphones in and their volume is on mute. So like if you put some subtitles in there, they can at least follow along, and a lot of people will send it to someone else, or like, you know, even send it to themselves so they can watch it again later with the sound on. So
Very good point.
Okay. We're dropping a lot of knowledge here.
And I can't remember what it's called, but there is like a free software out there that can add subtitles for you. I want to say it's called like Subtitle, but there's a free software out there. You can add subtitles. It'll do its best to like Siri the subtitles for you. You'll definitely want to go through and you know, double check them to make sure everything's translated properly. But there is software out there to help for sure.
AKA Google it.
Yes, sir.
Google is your friend.
Do your Googles. Make sure you find do some research and find the stuff.
And understand an RSS feed.
Yes.
For the life of
Step
me.
1, RSS feed. Step 2, subtitles for sure.
But thank you guys. I want to take a moment for you guys to go ahead, promote your podcast, promote anything that you're doing right now. Go.
Sweet. So I'm Oladipo. Like I said, I'm from the Toxic City podcast. One quick tip for the end of the podcast, you know, just make sure you really, you know, make sure you follow through with the podcast, because even if you know, take a hiatus and come back, like you really just want to be able to put out some sort of consistent product. And it's not going to be easy at first. You're going to learn some lessons along the way, but like I would say like our last podcast was our best. Like I feel like every time you make a podcast, it levels up from the previous one. So, you know, keep pushing through, and check out Toxic City Pod on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And again, that is Toxic City.
Yes, Toxic City Pod. Check us out. And we're on Instagram and Twitter at Toxic City Pod.
And then ours, me and Janice, it's Choosing Yourself with Janice and Rachel, talking about a lot of self-love, relationships, just post-grad life and what we've been through, just relatable chats, non-scripted. And yeah, we are actually on a hiatus right now, but we're talking about getting things rolling again soon. So listen to our first season and yeah, let us know what you think.
We are also on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok at Choosing Yourself JR, and all of those platforms. Our social media has also been on a hiatus, but like Rachel said, we are in the midst of, you know, talking about getting things rolling again. I did record a solo mini episode to get that started, so that will be in the works and coming up pretty soon, so you can check that out and then we'll go from there.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, guys, and that has been another episode of Toon Talks with the Pharaoh. See you guys next week.